Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Dan Baptiste, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. Hey everyone, welcome back to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. Today we're joined by Bernard Huang, renowned SEO expert and co-founder of Clearscope, a leading SEO research and optimization software platform for content teams. Bernard has a decade plus of SEO experience and is a content-led SEO guru, or so he tells me. Today we'll be discussing the hottest topic in SEO right now, which is Google's new search experience powered by generative AI and what the future holds for Gen AI-powered search. Welcome to the show, Bernard.
Dan, an honor. What a true honor to be here. I couldn't think of anybody better to be talking about brand marketing, content marketing, and AI wizardry.
We love it. Before we get to the wizardry, though, let's take a step back. So I think understanding perspective and expertise is important. You have a pretty cool story, especially in your roots. So why don't we start there, talk about how you got here and kind of where you got your start in SEO, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Great. So long story, very short. I joined a Y Combinator startup 11 years ago. God, time. This is 2013. The company is called 42 Floors, and it is like Zillow except for commercial real estate. They brought me in as the growth hacker, which is a cool term back then. And they said, figure out growth for us. Handed me a almost blank checkbook and said, off you go. So I got to work. I rolled up the sleeves and I hacked Quora, I hacked SEO, I spent a bunch on PPC, and long story short, SEO was really the key channel that made a lot of sense for us to focus on. And you can imagine that makes sense because commercial real estate, lots of people are searching on the internet for office space for rent in take every geography in America and multiply it out by all the different combinations. So that's where I got my bread and butter. It was a very, very experimental and eye-opening position, right? I got to do all of the things, fix all the technical problems and get as, black hat as buying links and, getting penalized by Google. But that was encouraged. They like stood up and applauded when it was like, hey, we have a manual web spam action that's taken down 80% of our traffic. They're like, that's what you get when you push the boundaries of, what works and what doesn't. Since then, I started a consulting agency with my business partner in SEO. We've worked with brands like Strava, DoorDash, Teespring, AllTrails. And when you work with a ton of different brand teams and content teams, you start to see and get a different sense of how SEO and content works, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all equation. And you start to realize that different brands, different strategies are going to work for different business models and different industries. And that's where this holistic sense of SEO really came about. Then bootstrapped Clearscope as one of the leaders in content optimization, and now we're here.
Are you still the young guy who's pushing boundaries, or now that you have the responsibility of owning a company, are you playing it more safe?
In my spare time, I try to push as many limits of what the algorithm can handle. But these days, there's just not enough time to go around. Building a team, leading is all engrossing. And, I would say that I'm blessed with a fantastic team. And, we're always really thinking about, what's next. And these days, I think that's all everyone in the industry can really think about with AI looming and this this changing landscape that we find ourselves in.
Before we go all the way there, Bernard, I think it's important to get grounded really on the experience that Google has always tried to create. And, as you look at some of the updates, over the last 11 years or so, it's really started to reward certain styles of behavior. And, it would kind of have people be able to game the system and then it would course correct and game the system and course correct. Can you talk about some of the updates that, quickly on some of the major updates Google has made over the years and how that has made the experience better? Because I think that may give some context of where things are and where they're headed.
Oh my God. Yeah. So let's go back, way back machine. I think the main ones that are relevant in looking back were Penguin. So Penguin, there's all these names and weird things, but yeah, so Penguin devalued spammy links. And if you've been around search for a long time, you know that search is built on links, right? In the very early days, if the New York Times linked to you, that's worth 1,000 points. And if, Bernard's blog that has no authority links to you, that's worth, 1 point. And so it was this link-based algorithm. And people would say, oh, well, if Bernard's blog is worth 1 point, why don't we just spam millions of Bernard's blogs, each worth 1 point, and that's going to be worth, 1,000 New York Times. And I mean, they did exactly that. So Google was like, okay, that's not okay. Link spam out, Penguin. Then came the era of thin content, which Panda went to go and penalize. And this was due to the fact that a lot of people would build websites, point a bunch of spammy links on it, and literally plagiarize other content providers with their content on their site, but because they built more links, they would rank above those other sites. So Google then said, okay, well, that's not okay. Like, there needs to be an original source of content, and any duplicate content should be removed from the algorithm. So you saw then, these two. Then came Hummingbird, which was this idea that, okay, if people are searching for any given keyword, that, well, they probably want the most comprehensive piece of content on the topic rather than the keyword replicated a bajillion times on a particular page. So Hummingbird really started to get content creators thinking about quality and comprehensiveness, and you saw the rise of the ultimate guide and the skyscraper technique of more, longer, bigger, better. Then came RankBrain, which introduced the idea of user engagement signal, right? At that time, Google was still a index that was fairly static in that they did an update, produce a set of results, people would engage with it, and a month, 2 months later, they would update to the index with the new findings on content comprehensiveness and link data. But RankBrain made it fluid. It made it this dynamic search engine results page where, today you could be rank 2, but if people clicked on your result and didn't like it, well, tomorrow you could be rank 8, right? So there was this idea that user engagement signal started to influence how, the search results work. Then the next big one, outside of just all these like little mini ones along the way, would probably be the helpful content update. And, now we're like looking at 2 years ago. And the helpful content update, started to have this more human set to it. Like, are you writing for humans rather than search engines? Are you producing for humans? And now we're in this ecosystem where Google's all about the humans, right? You see the rise of Quora, Reddit, these user-generated content communities, and that's Google saying, humans, please. You see Google saying, expertise, experience, authority, trustworthiness, authorship. These are important, and that's Google re-emphasizing, right, for humans. And that's where we're at today, right? Where Google propaganda is saying it's all about humans, but we have this legacy of all kinds of different ways that people have gamed the system and, gotten traffic.
Do you see these as building blocks of a platform that's trying to get better and trying to improve the experience? And, what were some of the consistencies along the way? Like if, as you've seen lots of different types and styles of businesses, kind of consistently, if you had these ingredients, you were doing pretty well. Like, can you talk about that?
So there's a whole ruckus, if you will, within the SEO community where, one side is like, takes up their pitchforks, right? And they're like, Google lied to us. Like, they said it was all about creating for humans, and we did, and we've gotten, like driplets of traffic. And there is the other side where it's more brand focused, and it's more like, yes, if you do this, you will be rewarded, and if you don't, you will be penalized. And the bigger brands look at, that and say, yes, well, we are a brand, and, therefore we have a lot more power to dominate the search engine results. So I think that's a common narrative throughout the progression of search. But I'll just say that what Google says and what happens is oftentimes at odds with one another. I think Google's propaganda is aspirational, but it's oftentimes many years ahead of where the algorithm is going to be. And they, in a way, wield it as a way to shape the creation of content that we produce so that ultimately Google can benefit. Obviously, Google wants to serve ads. They want to, monetize the traffic that they're generating. And I think the consistent themes is that the cannibalization of traffic by Google itself is a consistent theme over, the last decade. I think if it can be gamed, it will be gamed is a consistent theme over the last decade. And I think the importance of brand is another important theme over the last decade.
When you say importance of brand, what do you mean?
I mean that when you Google or search or even look to buy anything, I think that we as people are heavily influenced and biased towards brands that we know, we love, and we trust. And as a result, Google search is biased towards brands because brands are just more click worthy. If I see, like how to train for a marathon and there's a piece from Nike, I'm much more likely to click on that than, from a small independent blogger like, Marathon Matt or something like that. And, is that really Google's fault or problem? Maybe, maybe not, but it's just unfortunately or fortunately how the world works.
Yeah. As we think about that, and if you're, I guess, let's take a step back now. And I guess, as we look at all of the elements that have led us here today, you're talking about the cannibalization of the experience at search. And like, instead of sending people into other places, Google has, started to hoard that traffic a little bit, starting, with some of the updates and the featured snippets and now some of the generative AI answers. Can you talk about, as a brand, how to think about that? And is it valuable to be in those positions? Are people clicking from those positions into websites? How do we understand, that landscape today? And, as a brand, what do I do?
I think the best thesis that I have on this is multifold. Number one, I do think that the cannibalization of Google searches is nothing new. Back 2000, in the early 2000s, we would Google weather or directions to Starbucks or whatever. But as the internet and technology has evolved, I just check my weather on my phone. I go to Google Maps if I'm looking for directions to a particular locale. I have a stocks app, so why should I Google Starbucks market cap, right? I get these things from different sources. And in each infraction of incremental technology improvement, we've seen whole classes of queries, usually niche, disappearing from Google search. Fast forward to today, I think we're in for the biggest cannibalization of Google searches that we've ever experienced. And that is the advent of artificial intelligence and its ramifications, right? Instead of going to Google to search for a marketer job description template, I might ask Gemini or ChatGPT to create one for me, right? And so instead of asking Google for a recipe on, chicken tenders, I might ask ChatGPT to create one for me. So we see this shift, right, in user behavior, and we also see this shift in Google, right, where Google now says, hey, look, right, if everybody says Taylor Swift's song Antihero lyrics are all the same, well, why wouldn't we just answer that for you in the same way that chat ecosystems and artificial intelligence would? So the best way that I can then say this is that I think we're seeing the biggest cannibalization of informational queries that we're ever seeing. And, should we be scared as content creators in the digital landscape? I would argue no. You just have to understand that you're not going to get traffic if somebody's searching for what is a marathon or what is a shoe, because, why should you? Instead, you have to focus more on the middle of the funnel, the bottom of the funnel, and more of the brand elements, right? Like not what is a shoe, but, why certain materials of shoes are better or worse for different distances in running, or, these more nuanced subjects that artificial intelligence and language models are just not going to be as good at answering.
I think, you bring up an interesting point here, which is Google has changed and evolved over the years because the information landscape is changing, right? So if we think of a weather app that's giving you all the information you need at your fingertips, or a stock app, or any of these elements, and basically it comes down to what is the best platform to deliver the experience that I desire, right? So if you think of people learning through TikTok today, to your point, going to other places other than Google for information, that brings up a couple of really interesting thoughts. And one is, what do you think some of these platforms, and maybe generative AI is a specific one, what do you think that is good at and bad at? And then because of that, what do you think Google needs to strive to be good at as it looks to evolve into some sort of future state here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the easy stuff. I think artificial intelligence is great at everything that, for the most part, we all agree upon. I've been calling this a consensus model because artificial intelligence is trained on data, content that we've all contributed to on the internet. If more or less everybody agrees that the first president of the United States is George Washington, then yeah, it's pretty freaking good at answering consensus answers, right? So that's going to be definitions, history, facts. We all more or less agree X is X and Y is Y. One level deeper, I think we start to like think about creation. I think that large language models are really good at generating stuff. And, that's going to be templates, itineraries. It's going to be, and I think Google I/O kind of showcased it, these long contextual like searches that people in the past couldn't make because the search algorithm didn't understand that, somebody wants a 3-day itinerary for Denver, Colorado that is family friendly and focused on indoor activities because my kid has allergies, right? Like that just was not a effective search that somebody could do back then. But now, right, with the advent of language models, it can be. So I think that those are where, like a couple of different search queries that, people like. I think where artificial intelligence. I think where artificial intelligence starts to lose its luster is within perspectives, firsthand experience, within this idea of trust, right? I only get one answer from search if I'm saying, what are the best, headphones under $200? Well, I might not get one. They might give me like, okay, here's like 5 recommendations, but I have to stop and ask myself like, well, do I think this language model actually knows why they're recommending, the Sennheiser or the Sony? Like, I don't think so. Where's the evidence? How can I believe that your output is credible? And so I can't. I think, it is bad in, different types of searches where I need fidelity, right? Like, I need agency in my selection, right? If I'm Googling, what are the best vacuum cleaners and Forbes is number 1, well, I'm not gonna click on Forbes. I'm gonna click on, like Good Housekeeping or the Wirecutter because I think that they have, objectively better content than Forbes does, right? And so I think these are gonna be, it's like the messy middle, right? Like these kinds of queries where I need trust and credibility, and I need to believe that, my selection of the search is important in my consumption of, the content itself.
So in a sense, I mean, in the simplest terms, does that not make search better? If everybody was focused, not unlike the old days where you're thinking of black hat link building, if everyone was focusing on answering the same question, it's just domain authority ranks higher. And now in this world, you're forced to have an opinion or a perspective that matters and aligns and build trust and credibility through that, having something worthy of saying versus just checking a box that you have content. Like, in your mind, does that make the search experience better if we alter our behavior to actually pay that off?
Yeah, absolutely. In my mind, it absolutely does. But then we have to look at reality, right? And I think that the reality is, and Google's been getting a lot of heat lately. So I get it. Their AI overviews, have been questionable if you've been studying that, suggesting that, I can get my blinkers on my car to work if I add blinker fluid, or, like if I want my cheese to stick on pizza, I should add glue as an ingredient, right? It's like, all right, this is a little questionable. But okay, let's actually think about it from Google's perspective. Google has an insane problem, right? In the past, there were probably like hundreds of billions of documents that they had to sift through. And they needed to sift through that to figure out, if somebody performs a search for any given query, what is the best answer I can give? well, 100 billion, they have natural language processing, machine learning, user engagement signal, domain authority, all these things. And so far, so good. But with the advent of artificial intelligence and language models, the rate of content production has become close to infinite, right? We're looking at the largest influx of commoditized whatever content that's spewing onto the internet at record pace. And so I don't envy Google, right? Like this is an insane problem. How do you actually, as Google, narrow down what's good and what's not? And so anyways, Google, I think, comes out and they say, okay, yeah, if you firsthand experience, like perspectives, these are things that we care about. But they say that, and guess what? A lot of practitioners do, right? Like if it can be gamed, it will be gamed. They go to their large language models and they say, create for me a piece of content on how I trained for a marathon every day and the mistakes I made. And then, the large language model takes that and says, okay, mistake I made, number one, overtraining and, like all these things. And now, are the search results actually any better? Or did we just introduce, a new variable that everybody now picks up on that, Google now has to go, okay, well, I don't know if that was better, but that's the state of the world. So I think it's a nuanced answer. I believe that the future is going to be better, but at the same time, I think that it's a very complex problem. And I think we can continue to expect a lot of confusion, mistrust, and complication as Google tries to unpack what a better search should be just because of the enormous complexity of the challenge that they face.
As you brought up something interesting there, this concept of commoditized content. It is not adding value. It's kind of duplicating information that's across the web just so you can have a position or a page that has a potential to rank. What do you say to people that are using generative AI to create content that by nature is commoditized because it is being aggregating information that's already out in the web? Like, is that a strategy that you think is viable, or is it something that's going to get punished as you think about the future of search?
So I'll give you two answers. I'll give you, I think, the simple answer, and I'll give you the more complex answer. I think the simple answer is that Google's confused. They don't really know what is good and what is not good. And they've even said that in, the antitrust case where the Department of Justice, subpoenaed them, their internal communications, and their documents literally say, we don't know, we just fake it. And we use user engagement to tell us whether, something should be rank 1 or rank 2. And you're like, oh, okay, so Google actually doesn't know. All right, so the simple answer is that Google doesn't know, and that is why brands dominate. Because if Google doesn't know and Nike puts out a piece of content, Nike's piece of content is going to be more trusted, more engaged with, and better because it's Nike and, not Marathon Map. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it works. So that's the simple answer. The more complex answer, I think, has to deal with this emerging concept within the field of search, which what we're calling it is information gain. And information gain refers to this idea that topics are a messy web of related concepts. And so, if we're talking about, say, Nike as a brand, we'd say that Nike is closely associated with athletics, shoes, fitness, Michael Jordan. And these are all concepts that, belong to the topic of Nike. information gain refers to the idea that as Nike starts to dabble with opening up fitness studios or getting more into, the gamification of exercise and athleisure, that these as related topics are different directions that Nike is growing into or evolving. So the going hypothesis in the deep search community is that how do you create content that is additive to how a topic is evolving? Because only humans would really be able to know that within the context of talking about Nike, that they are opening, studio classes. They are getting into more athleisure and these different things. And language models are going to struggle because the training data associated with Nike in those particular areas is very weak. So the going thought then is that Google is really looking for content that is surfacing information gain within topical evolutional spots that are likely to only be done with subject matter expertise and human input, and language models are going to struggle there. So they're looking then at the differences between topic, content that matches what, the known relationships of words are, and then, kind of slicing it and saying, okay, but, Marathon Matt is including that Nike is, talking about athleisure and, studio classes. And wow, like nobody else is, not nobody else, but it's complicated. But basically, nobody else that can qualify to talk about it is talking about it. So that looks interesting, and let's put that at, position 1 or 2.
So if you're Marathon Matt, what do you do?
What do you do? Yeah, and this is where the Google propaganda says, you use your subject matter expertise to talk about firsthand experiences and perspectives that, users are going to care about. And you are authentic and credible, and you put your photos of everything on your site because that makes what you're saying way more credible. And right, if we're thinking about that statement I made earlier where Google propaganda is many years ahead of Google execution, I think what Google is then saying is that by doing that, you're going to be producing content that adds to the topic in a meaningful way that nobody else is really doing. And that sounds great. But in actuality, the problem is that it's a sort of like self-cannibalizing ecosystem, because as you do that and you, as Marathon Matt, start to rank up for the topics you're writing about because you're contributing meaningful information, guess what happens, right? Your competition or your brands who want to own those topics look at what you've done and they say, oh, okay, well, Marathon Matt is talking about the biggest mistakes he made while training for his ultra marathon. And they say to their content team, yeah, that looks good. Just do that. And then they do. And then Nike comes out with 12 mistakes that, we made while, training for our ultra marathon. And then now all of a sudden Marathon Matt's, back down on the search engine results page because, well, Nike says it and, Marathon Matt is less authoritative, less brand, worthy. So they get pushed back down. And so it's this very strange world where small publishers do unique and interesting things because they have to punch above their weight. And then brands see it and they say, oh, that looks good. And then they kind of just replicate it. And then the small publishers get punished because they're not as big of a brand, which is why then Google keeps saying, like, focus on the brand, be a brand. Brand is everything. And I mean, that's great if you're a brand. And I mean, they're basically trying to encourage small publishers to all become brands, and some do, right? The Points Guy, so on and so forth. But most don't. And it's kind of just a troubling world for small publishers.
So if I unpack that a little bit, then part of it is creating almost specialization within a lane of a topic. So if I'm a smaller publisher, I can't afford to be shallow across a lot of different places. I have to have a unique perspective that I can own, that is tangential to my business, and go all in. Is that, am I hearing that is a takeaway? If you find yourselves in a position, or some of our audience find ourselves in a position where they're on their heels a little bit, they don't have a large search position, is focus in speciality or specialization, is that the right path or the right mindset?
Yeah, I think, the other emerging buzzword within the search community is this idea of topical authority. Google had, some API documents leak recently, big news in the search ecosystem. And, there's all kinds of technical craziness in there. But one of the big lessons learned was that Google has this idea of what they call a site focus score as it relates to site embeddings, which is a fancy word of just saying, what is this website talking about and how authoritative is it? So in SEO speak, we call that topical authority. And in the past, it would be kind of this like, okay, if we're sticking with the marathon analogy, what is a marathon? How to train for a marathon? Best marathons to run in 2024. And, it'd be this very, we'll call it cookie cutter style of targeting keywords that get search volumes, creating, every who, what, when, where, why best for a topic, and leaving it at that. But with this advent of site embeddings and topical authority, we now unpack a new layer that says, yeah, you should actually go much deeper into marathons, right? It's not just about the who, what, when, where, why best in marathons. It's, things that I considered before training for my first marathon, how I trained for my first marathon, mistakes I made while training for my marathon, things like why you shouldn't do a marathon, right? Like all these different angles and perspectives that the user is likely to care about. And that's actually how you differentiate, right? You prove to Google that you, as Marathon Matt, are an authority on marathons. And by boosting and talking about all of these deep little nooks and crannies of marathons, you can. And, Nike is going to look at that and say, well, I mean, that's like 50 pieces of content that we got to create. Maybe we're better off just talking about shoes, right? Like talking about, they have a lot more coverage that they want to go after and a lot more head topics and things. So they're not going to get as nitty gritty just simply because they're too all encompassing. So I think you're right in the assessment of, okay, by then really going deep into these nooks and crannies, you can boost your site embeddings and focus score around specific topics. And then this is also like how Google is trying to combat all this commoditized content crap that's coming out, right? They're like, okay, who actually is producing content that is meaningful to specific, topics and subtopics, and let's boost those websites. And so that's the way to go about it.
Does that present problems? Obviously, like when you're approaching that, the nooks and crannies, the search volume or patterns or behaviors around those are going to be much, much smaller. Is the juice worth the squeeze on that? Or is the idea that when you have a library of this style of content, then the variations of searches are going to start driving in, so the traffic will come if you build an aggregate? I'm just trying to understand the business case here, as we're thinking about like going down this path as content leaders.
Yeah, I think a lot of old concepts are kind of like out the door, right? You don't target keywords that get a lot of searches, in the space, you call it monthly search volume. And to a degree too, you don't, kind of create like in a traditional sense, the topic clusters on the who, what, best, why. You kind of need to create this like journey of content, right? As somebody is like wanting to learn more about marathons, they will want to know whether they should do them, how they can train for it as a beginner in a very quick time frame or a longer time frame, again, depending on how much time they have. So it's more of that. And then I think as a business, we need to be very cognizant about what topics we actually care about and that we want to own. The previous playbook would say, yeah, marathons, this much search volume, who, what, when, where, why, best, done. Okay, shoes, like this much search volume, who, what, when, where, why, best, done, right? And it was this very cookie cutter, like, all right, here's the mold, bop, 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 build some links, like, we're good. But, in this more specialized, that's the term that you use, in this more specialized, more niche environment that we are playing in, it's no longer okay to just be like, okay, all right, who, what, when, where, why, best, we're done. You have to prove to users and, therefore prove to Google that you do know what you're talking about, that you are adding to the topic in a meaningful way. And, you have to understand that you're going to get less traffic just because Google is itself cannibalizing a lot of the more highly trafficked terms. But it's just the world that we live in. And it's what happens when channels and technology get saturated, right? Your cost of customer acquisition goes up. Your competition goes up. There's, more players. There's more, more effort that you have to spend, and you're going to get less squeeze, but you just have to accept that that's how any distribution channel that's effective ends up like playing out, right? That's how all these things play out. And what we're struggling with is nothing new, right? This is just how the game works.
I think you've used the word authority a few times. And if I hear you right, it's really creating an authority around ownable lanes that matter to you and are related to your business. You started your career with a blank check experiment, right? If you had that same experiment today, you were sitting inside the walls of a brand and you had a blank check and your goal was to create authority, what would you do?
Yeah, I think I would first define the topics or the ownable lanes that we care about, right? I want to really understand, why these are important, who our target market is, and really hone in on that. So first, define a list of high-level topics that we care about. From there, number two, I would think about content creation as a multi-channel approach, right? It's not just text on a page anymore. It is engaging video content that might go on TikTok if, right, we are a brand that cares about that particular segment of audience, might go on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, right? All of these different channels, right? We have to understand that content is an orchestration effort, not just a, like, let's just, do it here. So, right, then it's understanding the mediums of, where we plan on distributing our content because of the target market that we're looking to reach. From there, it turns into, the strategy, right? If TikTok is important, then yeah, short form video has to be, a priority. If LinkedIn is important, then, LinkedIn is kind of crazy these days, but it's maybe these, 2-sentence long, humble brag posts or whatever that people are putting out. And that's like, important. And we have to, kind of play to the strengths of each one of those. And then I think it's about just everything. And then once you understand that, I feel like the distribution and promotion is baked in, right? Like, you know that you're creating short form video and that should go on TikTok, but the longer form, content should live in your email newsletter instead. But I feel like a lot of people kind of take one message, one content format and blast it across everything. And then they come back and they're like, well, that didn't work. And it's like, yeah, that didn't work because you're not hitting people in the right way across the different channels that, you care about. And I think you have to understand that search is more and more becoming a middle of funnel and bottom of funnel channel, right? It's not as much discovery. Discovery is kind of becoming a pay to play in search, right? Like, if you want to rank for shoes, you got to pay. But, if somebody heard about Nike's newest shoe line on a TikTok short video and then Googled whatever that was, then search is a way to capture interest generated rather than produce interest generated in certain areas, right? Obviously, everything should be like, it depends, but I'd say more or less, think of search as one channel amongst many channels, and then think of search as more of a, capturing of interest and awareness rather than a producing of interest and awareness.
Does that counteract some of the elements you were talking about before, which is, you talked about Nike having the ability to own a first person perspective on what I wish I knew about, training for my first marathon. And that's a way to introduce Nike as authority on marathons and maybe calls to action alongside shoes. So as we think about discovery, I know there's a lot in the air and there's a lot of conflicting thoughts out here, but is discovery, you have to become an authority and expand that authority in order to play in that discovery space from search? Or are you saying discovery is happening only on other channels and not search?
Yeah, I think it's both to a degree, right? I think, training for a marathon, I think you can own that, but, shoes, like, no way, right? So different topics have different maturities. And it's, what I'm saying is that for very mature ecosystems and topics, yeah, like email marketing, you're probably never gonna punch above MailChimp, Constant Contact, HubSpot, whatever, right? I mean, yeah, maybe in like 5 years when you really get an email marketing tool off the ground, but then you say, okay, if we're going after email marketing and we are a newer challenger in the space, I think you have to accept that, you can't really produce as much discovery, but, maybe within, email marketing orchestration or automation, you can, right? And that's more of that middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And, you start there, don't expect to go, over to the head topic and win that. Build authority within email marketing, and then maybe, there, and then, you just have to play within the bounds of how it all goes. And then I think, the final thought here is just that you should start yesterday. And if not yesterday, today. And you might say, oh man, the juice that I'm getting from the squeeze is like way worse. And it's like, yeah, that's why you want to start yesterday, because in 5 years, it's going to be even worse.
So, I mean, I guess you answered my next question, which was, is now the time to slow down or speed up? I think there's a lot of uncertainty out there. You're saying speed up, correct?
I'm saying slow down on the cookie cutter whatever stuff, because that's on its way out. Yes, it still works, especially if you're a brand. But slow down on that and speed up on owning your niche, owning your topic, and yeah, start yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point as we get toward the end of here. If you're Salesforce, you can own the conversation around sales, but if you're a sales enablement niche platform, you can't, right? So what lane can you own, and can you focus and add perspective, and to your point, add value to the conversation, not replicate some generic commoditized search that you shouldn't be owning anyway, especially if the information you're putting out there is already on the web. Like there's tools out there that can aggregate that information. So as a brand, focusing on specialization, the value you bring to the conversation, and the narrowing the lane. If you're not Salesforce, narrow the lane, right? And figure out where you can and should own. Last question here, Bernard. This has been amazing. What inspires you about the future when it comes to both content and search?
I think what's inspiring is that the game is so dynamic. I think on one side of the coin, you could say, man, the juice is drier than it's ever been. And, fee, fi, fo, fum, all this change. But I think on the other side of the coin, you got to think change is inevitable. And with great change comes fantastic opportunity. And so, I'm optimistic in that, I think if anything, all that this is creating is a world that needs to produce more effort than it's ever produced to play in the game, right? The bar of what content should be is both lower than it's ever been to produce and increasingly higher than it's ever been to want to be consumed. And I think that, there's a fantastic opportunity for anyone who is willing to put in the effort, put in the work, because now all of a sudden, I think you will be more rewarded for the details, for the effort. And, I think that's, it's a lot of hard work, but that is encouraging and that is important. And it's how everything works, right? Like back in the day, maybe, producing a TV show commercial was cheap, but now you spend millions of dollars, like even more than you would spend on the Super Bowl ad itself to produce the content for the Super Bowl ad. And it's the same, right? And so I think the world benefits as a result of all of this effort, but only if you're willing to put in the work.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a full loop here. I think we talked at the onset of Google rewarding and evolving to deliver great, interesting experiences. In this case, in this world, in this utopia that we're describing, that hopefully we get there. It's responsible people adding value to the ecosystem, spending the time thinking about the stories, the lane, the strategy, and how we need to show up and how we need to add value, not, gaming a system to try to grab a rank position on some, term that is marginally valuable, right? So starting to think of a future where stories matter, brands matter, perspective and insight and differentiation matters. Like all those things are exciting, but as we think about internalizing that ourselves, to your point, it takes work, it takes thought, it takes perspective, and there's tools to kind of help accelerate some of the downstream efforts so we have the space and time to think about those things. But that's the new bar, right? Like that's what's required. And I think for me as well, when I think of that and I look at the last 5 years in particular, as the need for content has exploded and the thought going into content has shrank, it's created this vacuum. And hopefully we're at a point where that pendulum has swung back. And now we're in a position where it requires us to be thoughtful, to be original, to be differentiated. And to your point, think of the entire position we're trying to create, not one-off assets for a particular channel or a rank position. So with that, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. It sounds like we may have to have a round two in 6 months when the world flips upside down again. But, thanks. We appreciate the insight. Turns out you are actually a guru, and we thank you for that. So thanks, Bernard.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dan. The honor is all mine.
Thank you for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyword. To stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing, visit our website at skyword.com. That's skyword.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling.